There was a controversial start to this Armagddeon game between Levon Aronian and Alireza Firouzja. So this is Norway Chess 2020. Their classical game was drawn. They went to this Armagddeon, but Alireza thought that the game was starting at 8:45. The arbiter said he'd told the players 8:40, and so when Alireza turned up at 8:45, his clock had already been ticking down. Apparently the arbiter had actually started the clocks at 8:43. So Alireza was down to 5 minutes 22 seconds right from the start, playing with the black pieces. He only needed a draw, but Levon now had 10 minutes on the clock, pushing him with the white pieces for the win. Could Alireza turn it around, even though he was down to half the time? Let's see what happened here. So pawn e4 played. Alireza goes for the Caro-Kann. We saw them play like this in their classical game. We saw this by Alireza a lot during the tournament as well. I covered a game like this that he played against Duda, going down this line. I'll link that one at the end. So the bishop now comes to f5. The knight drops back. Bishop g6. And now pawn h4, this standard space gaining idea. Pawn h6 played, the knight came to f3, knight d7, and now in that game with Duda we saw pawn h5 played, taking some space. Instead Aronian goes bishop to d3 immediately. This is what he did in the classical game. The queen recaptures here. So there's some nuanced stuff at the super GM level. You know, Aronian wants to keep this pawn on h4, not have it on h5. Subtle stuff. Pawn e6 played. This bishop now came to f4. In the Duda game we saw a bishop d2 setup, but both players after knight g to f6 did head for this castle's queenside stuff. So an exciting game on our hands. Bishop e7 from Alireza. And now the normal kind of maneuver here for white with this knight is to come into e4. You can also play, say, king b1. But Levon goes for knight to f1, an interesting move he played in the classical game. He's coming round to e3 to then support a later g4. Now in the classical game, Alireza went knight to g4. Here he goes queen a5, and you can understand this decision in Blitz. You want to bring the queen into the danger area, you want to mix it up, attack your opponent. So king b1 played, and now a normal looking move here would be castles. Instead, Alireza goes rook to d8. Looks slightly strange to my eyes because arguably this rook would be on d8 after castles. This one can go here or here, but we'll see his big idea in a moment. So Levon goes bishop c1, not necessarily the best move, but he wants to stay super solid, cover those dark squares, cover b2, and now knight c5 from Alireza. This was his big point of rook d8. So the queen drops back to e2. Knight a4 now played, and this is a really annoying knight. It already looks at the b2 pawn. If the other one can hop into d5, then you'd actually be threatening knight c3 check already, picking up the queen. After this one captures, we take back with the other knight. So pawn c4 is an important move, keeps the knight out of d5. Castles now from Alireza, and here Levon plays a bit tentatively really. g4 is actually the best move in this position. It is a gambit and black is basically forced to take that pawn, but then you get rook g1. Now pawn h5 is the best move, holding the knight. You can't really be going f5 stuff. Then the e6 pawn is loose from the queen, and after this you can follow up with knight to e3. There's lots of pressure against the knight. This is the best way to play, but Levon didn't do this. He went queen to c2. Now we had pawn c5. Still g4 is probably the best move, but Levon goes bishop d2, hits the queen, yes, but when it drops back to a6, white's whole setup now looks a bit ugly. Pawn b3 was played, but Levon's just playing on the queen side here, playing into Alireza's hands, into an attack. And here there was already actually a fantastic move for black to punish white's play. You could have gone pawn to b5. Now Alireza just doesn't have the time to calculate this, so he didn't play it. But the point is that after you take the piece, then you can take on c4. Say you went bishop c3, opening the rook, covering the king. Well, knight d5 is excellent. The rook's coming to the b file, the bishop to f6. Massive attack for black, and black is doing well. Now you'd find that kind of thing in a classical game perhaps, but this is Blitz. Knight b6 played. Alireza's not sure what's going on there. and now the bishop came to c3, suddenly looks more harmonious, and here Alireza should go knight b to d7, because you clear the way for the b pawn. If white takes, then you bring the knight in with tempo, just an all-round better move. What he does is takes on d4 after bishop to c3, but now you centralize the white knight. Yes, he goes knight b to d7 here, but now this one hits e3, knight c5, pawn g4, and look at the transformation of the position. So the white pawns are coming quickly, the knights are in the center, the bishop is a monster. This is scary for black. So Alireza hops into e4, anticipating g5 here. The bishop came back to b2, it was attacked by that knight, and now knight d6 played. Might look slightly strange, but it is tough for black now. It does prepare b5 potentially, plus clears the e4 square for this knight. g5 now from Aronian. He's got to attack. Pawn h5 from Alireza. He wants to keep those lines closed. And now queen e2 from Levon. He's switching that one over into the danger zone, looking at this pawn. Now the computer wants pawn g6 here as the best move, but I can understand why Alireza didn't do this. This diagonal now looks horrendous. There's still lots of pressure for white here, not very fun. So instead he goes knight c to e4. He prefers to stay active, look to mix it up tactically. Now you can actually capture here as white, and then Alireza said he was preparing queen a5. If you take the pawn on f2, the problem with this is knight takes on e6. You need to be aware of these tactics in the position, because if you capture back here, then pawn g6 shuts this trap on the king. You've got queen h7 check coming. If the rook ever gave some room, well then you mate here using the pawn. All crashing through for white, really good. This bishop is a monster, as we can see. So after this move of knight c to e4, Levon didn't actually take on h5. Instead he played his rook to the g file first. Now Alireza went queen a5, and he wants some knight c3 check stuff. So we had rook d3 to cover that piece, and now knight c5 drops back, hits the rook, puts a question to it. It came back to d2. Alireza hopped back, and of course Levon doesn't want a draw. He needs to win, so he goes rook to c2 here. Alireza now goes rook f to e8, clearing some room for his bishop to come to the f8 square, protect the king. Still he doesn't defend this pawn. He wants to try and stay as active as he can, and now Levon dives in. He takes that pawn, he's into the danger zone, and both players are down to about a minute here, and they don't get a second increment until move 40. So Alireza's caught Levon up here by this point. It's very neck and neck. So knight d2 check played. The king came to c1 here. You could go to a1, but I think Levon was hesitant to do that. Then in the future there could be some knight b3 check stuff using the pin if this knight ever moved away. Now we had knight 6 to e4, so the other one's hopping in, and here Levon actually has a beautiful winning tactic if he found it. Again, it's deep, it's hard to calculate, but he could have gone knight d to f5, and basically you're just flooding all the white pieces into the attack. You open up this bishop, as we can see. Now if that one's captured, then the follow-up move here is pawn to g6. Just everything is crashing through. So knight d to f5 was a big move, but Levon missed it. He had no time. Instead he went pawn c5, and now the evaluation bar just absolutely switches down. Black is now completely winning if Alireza takes on a2, but he missed it. This is Blitz chess. Now he's threatening queen b1 mate, so there's big problems for white. You'd have to give up the rook like this. The knight recaptures. You can't even now take that one, or you lose your bishop with check. The whole thing is just awful for white now, but Alireza misses this. He doesn't take on a2. He's preoccupied with his own king, so he goes pawn g6. And now can you guess the move that Aronian played? It's the best move in the position, keeps his hopes alive, and if you're enjoying this video, do hit that like button, let me know, and consider subscribing to the channel to never miss a future video. So here Aronian played queen h8 check, giving his entire queen, but knight c6 check is the follow-up. You've opened up this monster bishop, and after the king moves, we pick up the queen here. So white is actually a pawn ahead, But these knights are now hopping around really menacingly, coming into f3, and actually black's going to win one of these loose pawns back. Now you can defend this h-pawn like this, but Levon goes rook d1, he wants to stay active. This is what the top players do. Alireza picks up on c5, and now Levon swaps here, the rook recaptures, and again he misses a tactical shot. So his best move here was knight takes on b7, because after the knight recaptures, rook c7. Simple tactic, hitting both pieces, white is winning and doing well. This was Aronian's shot, but he missed to do this. He went bishop f6 instead. These ones got swapped off, the pawn recaptured. Now both players are getting a second increment, but they're down to about 16 seconds on the clock. Really tense. So pawn b6 from Alireza. He bolsters his knight, kicks this one into c6. It attacks the pawn, but rook d7 holds that pawn, comes away from the attack. Black is looking good here. How can Levon shake it up? Well, he starts with rook c4, holds this h-pawn here, and now best for Alireza was actually knight d3 check. Simple tactic, wins f2, but instead he goes king h7. He just wants to improve that king. Now king b2 from Aronian, and here he's looking to actually run into a3 if you get a rook d2 check, for example. But Alireza jumps with this knight. He hits the rook. It comes to the d file. We have an exchange here. Knight recaptures. This is tough for Aronian now. How can he mix it up? Well, knight d to e4 played, hits both of these pawns, so he went knight g4, covering both pawns, but now knight d3 check played. The king moved away and takes on f2. Alireza's actually a pawn up now, so a pair of knights got exchanged. This one recaptured. Knight c6 hit the pawn, and now excellent play from Alireza. He ignores a7, he brings his knight back into the game. We have a pawn exchange like this, but black's doing well. You've got that pawn up, plus this knight's recycling into the game really fast. So pawn a4 from Aronian, knight d5, and now knight c6 coming back in, supporting b4, b5, but Alireza goes pawn f6, excellent move. He wants to get g5 going, push his own pawns. b4 now from Levon, and technically best here for black is to actually march the king in, win the h-pawn, then start pushing the pawns. But okay, you can't calculate, so pawn g5 played. Gets those ones going as fast as possible. We had this exchange here. The king came to d3, pawn g4. This knight creates a nice barrier from the white king. So Levon goes pawn a5, but this is what Alireza had planned. He slams it down on the board. Knight takes on b4. Excellent move. And here in this position, Aronian actually resigned. Now he didn't have to resign. He could have just played on to a draw, and then he would have lost the game technically because he has to win and not draw, but at least he could have played it out for the draw. But basically his best move is to take here. Then black can take here, and the problem for white, of course, after say knight c6, is you've got no mating material. So even if this knight gobbles up all the pawns, you can't actually mate the king. So what a game by Alireza, against the odds, down to half the time. If you want to see him playing this same variation against Jan Krzysztof Duda, click here. Thanks for watching, see you soon.